Hey there, my friends. Welcome to the Links to Messiah podcast, where we are passionate about teaching our children all about the connections between the Old and New Testament. I'm your host, Rachel Links Kushner, also known as the Chief Enthusiasm Officer of Links to Messiah. I'm so thrilled to have you join us today. Come along and learn how your family and children can grow in their faith as you discover the beautiful links that God reveals throughout Scripture about the history of His people and His Son Jesus, our Messiah. Hello to my friend Bob Mendelsohn, who I have not talked to in, I'm going to say probably
It is
decades, Bob.
decades.
Do you think
Yep.
it's a really long time? We have a long history that goes way, way back. I know I was volunteering. You were on staff with Jews for Jesus while we were handing out tracts in New York
Even
City,
before
trying to talk
that,
to
when
people
you were
about
just a wee
Jesus.
lass in Philadelphia,
Tell me about that.
it was a great era when we would drive over from New York City and use
Okay.
the Messianic Jewish Center in
Yes.
Center City as a hub for
19th
work
and Chestnut.
on Chestnut. Yep. As our hub, and when I moved to Washington, D.C., and we met up with the New York team, we would meet at your dad's place. That was it.
I didn't realize that.
So I'd
That's so
known you
cool.
since you
So
didn't want to be known.
let's see, I'm 53, so I was like, I don't know, probably 10 years old. I
Yep.
don't know, maybe younger. It's really nice to be reconnected with you. So before we jump into like our conversation about why teaching the Old Testament and feasts and all that is so important, let's just give our listeners a little bit more background about you. Obviously, you are on staff with Jews for Jesus. You were in New York. You were in DC. Now you're in
For the last
Australia,
26
correct?
years, I've been in Sydney.
Have you been 26 years?
A
Wow.
fair bit of time.
And you have,
I grew up in Kansas City.
yes. Oh, okay.
The third of three, you understand, in a
Yes.
a messy home, not a messianic home. It was
Messy.
an Orthodox, but not ultra Orthodox Jewish home.
Oh,
And
right, really?
30% of my of my school was Jewish. It was a suburb
Mm,
that included everybody. It was a boomer
mm,
generation home,
yeah. Yeah.
suburban Kansas City. And the synagogue and even the Jewish Community Center eventually moved towards that side of town, away from
Oh,
the
interesting.
historic 1920 to 1880 to 1920 immigration of the Jewish people.
Okay.
So
Yeah, yeah.
that's where the Jews
Huh.
had always been. And everything about my life was Jewish, although there was Kansas City Athletics, who used to be in Philadelphia.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. They moved in 1955 to Kansas City, and now
Oh,
a
wow.
decade and a half later, they moved to Oakland, where they've been since. So I grew up
Okay.
with sports. So when you think about baseball, you think about maybe a Philadelphia Philly, you'd still have loyalty there. You would think
Sure.
some others of your listeners, Chicago Cubs fans or New York Yankee fans. But for me, as a young Jewish boy, it wasn't just the local baseball guys who played for the Kansas City A's, Ed Charles, the third baseman, and Lou Piniella, Dick Hauser. We had guys, but it was Sandy Koufax. You think, why Sandy Koufax? Because he was a Jew who, in the World Series, didn't
Oh,
pitch on Yom Kippur. And for the
wow.
Los Angeles, formerly Brooklyn Dodgers, that was a big deal that
Sure, of
he would, if
course.
you will, in modern term, come out as a Jew and do something Jewish, to the dismay of the owner and to the fans. But Jewish mattered to him. So he was a hero to me in that regard,
That's
almost like
cool. Yeah.
Judah Maccabee in his generation.
Oh, that's so neat. I did not know that history about you. I didn't realize that you're you're Midwesterner.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my mom is a Midwesterner and we now live in the Midwest. Although we're in southern Indiana, a lot of people here, because we're just across the river from Kentucky, say that we're in the South.
Depending upon who I talk to, I'm either a Southerner or a Midwesterner. It's
You
funny.
when you draw the Mason-Dixon line, which separated
Right.
Pennsylvania from Maryland and go straight across,
Mhm.
sister, you are in the South.
Yeah, I'm in the South. That's funny. All right, y'all, let's get this conversation going. No, just kidding. And so you have 3 grown children and a bunch of
I do,
grandchildren,
I do.
correct? How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 7, 6 of whom I've met. The 7th is yet to be born. So
Coming
coming soon
soon.
in
Oh,
April.
nice.
And
Aw,
4, soon to be 5 of them live in Nashville, speaking of South,
where you were,
and
right.
2 of them live here in Sydney.
Oh,
And when we
that's
record this
wonderful.
today, last night, I
Mhm.
watched, along with my wife, the 2 here in Sydney. They're 6 and 4 years old. You might remember this thing called COVID, and
Doesn't ring any bells, haven't heard of it.
in 2020, March, it hit here like everywhere. And the government
Right.
gave some stipulations about how they wanted us to fight it. And you were not allowed outside your LGA, the local government area. Better think suburb, right?
Oh,
You weren't allowed
okay.
outside that. We had a 5 kilometer, 3 mile radius around which we could travel. One of the things they said
Wow.
was you could be with your immediate family, of course, but you can't even be with your nephew or your grandmother or whatever. And so it was painful to watch these almost nightly on the news of families being separate. I'm not a rebel
Sure.
by nature, but I rebelled against that and contacted my
Did you?
son, who had his 2.5-year-old son. And I said, I want to take him out on Saturday morning and go for coffee, which in those days
Right.
was a baby chino, which is just foam
Yeah.
right on top. Sprinkle, you got to get that.
I'm glad you clarified. I'm thinking, why would you give a 2-year-old coffee? They certainly don't
Yeah.
need that. But I
Yeah.
gotcha.
And as a result, that started a weekly Saturday adventure with Saba,
Little
and it has
Oh,
continued. And oh yeah.
really?
So
How
it started with,
wonderful.
we'll call it coffee. And then it progressed
Mhm.
to let's go for breakfast. Then it progressed to let's go to the art gallery. Then it progressed to,
Yeah, let's go to the zoo.
yeah,
Let's yeah.
every
Oh, that's
week. And
wonderful.
it's now about 4 or 5 hours every Saturday. And we hop on
Love
the
it.
bus, we go into town, we take the ferry or the train or the light rail, and we go. It's the adventure. We go to the last week. It was the library and a donut shop. We had to do both of those, but it took 4 or 5 hours to do all that.
It's so
I
wonderful.
had two
But I
neither of whom I really knew. My mother's father left the house before I was even born, and my father's father died when I was 7, and I was the 6th
you don't really know
grandchild.
him.
Well, I was always at the
Oh,
kids'
mhm.
table. You'll remember that.
Oh, yeah. I love hearing this story of you investing this time with your grandson. And that's really what I want to dive into as far as the importance of obviously that time, that treasured time is going to be something that he will remember for the rest of his days. He's going to remember his Saturday morning. What I want to
Not
dive
only he, but a year and change ago, the younger one, who's now 4, he was actually a year and change ago. So he was 3. I rocked up to pick up the older one, and the younger one was wearing a backpack, had his shoes on, and they were tied.
come on, let's
And I
go.
said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going on the adventure with Saba." Okay. So now it's both
Oh,
of them.
wonderful. That's amazing. What? Oh, that's so great. They are gonna, like I said, they'll remember that forever. So I'm sure you have great conversations with these little ones. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the importance of teaching our children or grandchildren when they are really small about the Old Testament, Jewish culture, the feasts, the holidays. Why is that important? Why does that matter to you?
The Shinantam Levanecha, and you shall pierce this into your children. It says in Deuteronomy, it says in the Shema, we are
Mhm.
convinced that what we are is going to be in our children and grandchildren or children's children. It's not so much that we're going to sit down and have a lesson today. Please grab the book and let's see what happens. No, it is who we are that migrates into the kids. So
Yeah.
when, like you, raised in a Messianic home, I have 3 kids raised in Messianic home, and
Right.
for each of them, they have a different expression of that Jewish life and culture. For my
Sure.
son, it was having those 2 boys circumcised. That's the first start. They went,
Right.
my son and his wife went to go see a movie last night. My wife and I babysat. They went to see the movie One Life, which is taken from the phrase, the Talmudic phrase, he that saves one life, it's as if he's saved the whole world. Anthony Hopkins stars as this British man, Nick Winton, who becomes knighted later on. But it's a World War II, Czechoslovakia, Save the Children. It's a modern story that was done back
Right.
then.
Yes.
But there go my kids to
Right.
go see that movie, and
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
Barbie movie and not the so
Right.
there's something about
Yes.
Jewish that's a homing device. That's what I want to call it. It's a magnet that when they
Mm-hmm.
see the news and there's this, but there's an Israel thing or there's a Jewish thing,
Right.
it grabs their
Yeah.
attention. It may not be
Of
that they
course.
agree with everything that I agree with, but there's a homing
Sure.
device there. And that's something
Yeah.
that it's not a lesson that we had during Sunday school one time. It's a life that
It's a
it's that
life.
morphs into who they are. In the same way,
Mhm.
every Sunday I'd go back when I was a puppy, I would go to one grandparent or the other, grandmothers both. And those times with my parents and then sometimes cousins and losing the tennis ball and just the different thing, getting lost on my way up the apartment steps. All these things are memories that
Sure.
sometimes haunt, sometimes help me, but they became part of me.
Yeah. I love, as you were describing about basically, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying basically you're living the lifestyle. And it reminded me, it brought to mind the quote, I cannot remember who said it. Maybe you'll know and you can help me about preach the gospel always, use words when necessary.
Yeah, it's
Have
been
you heard that?
attributed to St. Francis. It's been attributed to Mother
Oh,
Teresa.
oh, that's funny.
So
Not
I
sure
think
where
it
it
was
came from,
Mark Twain on the
but
internet.
yeah,
That's probably
that's funny. What kinds of things are you currently doing with the grandchildren to instill some of the Jewish feasts, the Jewish holidays, Old Testament
yeah.
types of
Look, we
things?
were just in Nashville for a couple months on sabbatical long service. We had Thanksgiving, we had Hanukkah, and we had
Nice.
Messiahmas. We had all 3 holidays with those grandkids and our
Yeah.
daughters and their husbands. So it was a
Mhm.
time, just take Hanukkah, for instance. We didn't have the once everybody come for that one day and we'll have latkes and we'll exchange presents. We had 8 nights of presents, 8 nights of Hanukkah
How
licht.
nice.
We had 8 nights of storytelling
Yes.
and we hosted. And now the great thing about the
Yeah.
3 houses in Nashville, the 2 daughters and ours, is that they're fairly close to each other. So
Mhm.
first night we're at this daughter's house, second night we're at our house, third night we're at that daughter's house,
That's,
fourth night. And we eat dinner.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not just come and exchange presents. We eat dinner, we schmooze. So as you
Yeah.
say, life that's transmitted. And within the
Yeah.
context of that life, we share the story. Who's Judah Maccabee? Why do we light the
Yes.
5th night? What's the tall one? Why do we have the tall candle lighting the other one?
What is that Shamish candle
Right.
all about?
So the
Yes.
story is told not in a one-off lesson,
Yeah.
but over
Right.
time. And so the kids
Mhm.
know this. Do they know
Yeah.
enough to pass a Bible exam? No, I don't think so.
Of
But
course
they're
not.
getting
Yeah.
it.
I was going to say they're getting it and they will get there.
Hey there, my friends. I'm interrupting this podcast for just a minute to tell you about the ultimate freebie packet for your family.
for the upcoming spring holidays of Purim and Passover. If you're looking for some fun and educational activities to keep your kids engaged, we've got you covered. You can head over to linkstomessiah.com and click on the resources tab to grab your ultimate Purim and Passover freebie packet. Dive into the world of Purim by creating and decorating your own crown, just like Queen Esther. Challenge your little ones with a thrilling Purim, maze, and crossword puzzle. Explore vocabulary related to Purim with the unique coloring page that we created just for you. But that's not all. Immerse your children in the Passover story with a Moses character coloring page, complete with "Let My People Go" written at the bottom. You can get creative with a Seder plate to color and cut out, and my favorite, embark on a Red Sea craft adventure. And for a dash of challenge, don't miss our memory game and our 10 plagues coloring sheets. It is an epic adventure of learning and fun for your kids. So visit the linkstomessiah.com website and click on the resources tab, or you can click the link in the show notes. Now back to our conversation.
So help us, for our listeners, think of some practical ways that, like, parents and educators, grandparents like yourself, can incorporate some of these Old Testament lessons, right, to help in the raising of their children.
Leviticus 23 is the list of the
Of course.
appointments with God. We call them festivals. We call them holidays. The Bible uses the word moed, which is what you and I have right now. We had an appointment at this appointed time. And I had a phone call with my boss, actually, just before this phone call. And because I had a moed with you, had to say to my boss, I've got to go now. I'm getting off the phone now so that I go to an appointment because it's locked in. In the same way, Shabbat is a moed. In the same way, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, all these are moedim. So they are calendar fixed. And once you put that into a weekly and then annual calendar, you don't even have to teach anything. The calendar teaches something.
Dictates. Yeah, the calendar dictates the rhythms
And
of
that's
life.
informing. And if I even just let that happen, where Jewish guys on the television who are intermarried say, we're going to have Chrismukkah. Okay. But why do they do that? Because there's a calendar that informs them that this is a time to do something, to be something. Calendar informs.
I love that.
I live.
The calendar informs. It's a moed. It's an appointment.
Yeah.
I really like that. I've talked with a lot of people and have gotten different answers to that particular question, but I've not heard anybody say that it's an appointment and it's a calendar. And if it's happening regularly, that is going to be remembered by our
That's
children. I remember Shabbat dinners with my family. I remember my Gentile mother who learned all the Hebrew prayers. I remember her saying them. I remember sitting around and having a Passover Seder with my family. These are all things that are moedim.
That's right. Look,
yeah, it's beautiful.
I live by
Bob.
the beach. Okay, 20 minutes away. I'm not next door. Here in Sydney. And you can stand there and watch the rhythm of the waves. It's calming. It's ferocious at times. If it's a tsunami, you don't want to be nearby. But there is something that is meditative. There's something that's informing that reminds you that you're not, and there's a God who's bigger than you. There's a lot of things the sea or the ocean teaches us, but one of those is the rhythm.
Sure. Yes, for sure. I was just talking with some friends about this is off topic a little bit, but about the power of water a brook, a stream, a lake, the ocean, all of these things show us a much bigger God. When I stand at the ocean and I watch those waves come continuously, they never stop. They keep coming, they keep coming. I'm so reminded of God's love. And that every wave that comes, it's never ending. It's always coming. Anyway, I could talk to you all night, Bob, but I do like to keep the podcasts really short because we got a lot of busy mamas that want to listen and learn. I thank you so much for your wisdom and your insight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So thank you
my
so
pleasure.
much.
And I hope that if anybody wants, of course, they'll write you via the podcast notes or however you communicate.
Yes.
What you're on Apple and Spotify, all of them.
All of them.
Yeah. I have the Bob's Your Uncle podcast.
Oh, I'll link it in the
that'd be
notes.
fine.
Bob's your
Bob's
uncle?
Your Uncle, which is a British phrase. It has to do with nepotism.
Yes.
And it
Yeah.
migrated here to Australia. So I have that, and I've been doing that for a couple of years now. Been a real pleasure.
Great. I'll be real sure people know about that. I want to make sure people
Thanks,
do
but
that.
I want to be a service to your listeners, however that might be.
Yes.
So anybody who says, yeah, but what about, I'm happy to answer. And they can write to Rachel, they can write to her straight away, and then you'll forward it to me. That's fine.
And get it to you. Okay, great. Thank you, Bob Mendelsohn.
Well, thank you. All the best to you and all yours.
Thank you for being a part of the Links to Messiah podcast family. Your support means the world to us, and your feedback and engagement keep us going strong. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends and family. Let's continue growing this incredible community together. Until next week, keep reading the Bible to your children, keep their curiosity burning, and keep coming back for more tips to anchor your child's faith to Jesus, our Messiah. This is your host, Rachel Lynx Kushner, signing off with a big smile and a heart full of gratitude.